Well, it's portal season for the Ducks, and they've got a big weekend right here, right now. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. If you have not already, please like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is indeed brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege. Use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy. Plenty to get to today. Wasn't going to do a Saturday show. Then I thought about it. Then I asked you, and you all said, yes, please. And I said, all right, I'm happy to oblige. So, big weekend for the Ducks. A handful of visitors that you should all be aware of. Now, Dante Moore, who I talked about on yesterday's show, is reportedly visiting next weekend, which is curious, and I'll get to that a little bit later as well. But the three names this weekend: Dillon Gabriel, the quarterback from Oklahoma; Andrew Makuba, the defensive back from Clemson; and Walter Nolan, the defensive lineman from Texas A&M. Nolan was the one-time number one overall recruit in his class when he went to Texas A&M. They've had a coaching change there. A lot of players from the Aggies are hitting the transfer portal, and he's reportedly coming to the Ducks. That right there gives me Jordan Burch kind of vibes. Now, we don't know what Jordan Burch is going to do. We know that Kyrie Jackson is going to the NFL, which is not a surprise. He had a first-team All-Pac-12 season, was really, really good. Really, from the get-go, he had some penalty issues earlier in the year, cleaned those up as the season went on, and he's going to go to the league, I think deservedly so. And Oregon will have to, that's a conversation for another day. But we don't know what Jordan Burch is going to do. You know that Brandon Dorlus is out of eligibility. You know that Popo Amavai is out of eligibility. Casey Rogers out of eligibility. Mace Funa out of eligibility. There are going to be a lot of new faces and names along that defensive line. Now, there's a lot of talent in the Oregon defensive line room. Guys who redshirted this year. There were just a bevy of 4-stars, many of whom played this year, but a lot of guys who didn't, particularly on the interior. Guys like Ashton Porter, guys like Terrence Green, guys like Amari Washington, Johnny Bowens. There are other names. Tavita Pumee is in the transfer portal. Not a huge surprise there. I think he was a little bit more of, a project coming out of high school. Really, really big guy. I think at his best could be a Jordan Scott type player, but he doesn't see a path to playing time because I think there are a lot of players that are going to be ahead of him. So I'm really curious to see who among those redshirt freshmen pop into players that are starting and making an impact in 2024. But Walter Nolan would definitely be one of those guys. And I think he's a Burch type of player. And I think that with the success Oregon had bringing in Jordan Burch, who was a very highly rated 5-star recruit coming out of high school, went to an SEC school where he did not have as much success, at least team-wise, as he was perhaps hoping, and is now in the portal considering Oregon. It's gone very well for Jordan Burch. And if you had Nolan and Burch and supplemented him, those two guys, I said M, not him, don't worry, not grammatically incorrect. I would never do such a thing. It's happened before. A time or two, maybe. Okay. If you had Nolan and Burch came back, and then to supplement him, you had the 3 true freshmen who'd be true sophomores who were all studs this year: Mateo, Blake Purchase, Tatum Tuioti. And then you work in the up-and-comers who all redshirted this year. Boy, I feel pretty good about that particular unit. So that's a big visitor. Dillon Gabriel is the biggest name, of course, because he plays the most important position of football. He was really good at Oklahoma this year, guided the Sooners to a 10-2 season. They were in position to control their own fate to get to the playoff, but they weren't quite good enough, and they stumbled against Oklahoma State and Kansas, who are good teams, but not great teams for sure. Gabriel is, we're waiting on that commitment. I don't know what the timeline's looking like there because Dante Moore is reportedly visiting next week. So I don't know when that could happen. At some point in time, I would assume before National Signing Day, which is late December. But I don't know for certain when that could all go down. Feels like with the Moore visit, I'll come back to that in a moment. But Nolan and then Makuba defensively, that's a guy I would love for Oregon to get because the safety position, rather depleted. The secondary in general, you could use talented bodies in there. When you're losing your best corner and you're losing several other defensive backs who were good players and played a lot this year, you're going to need some names on the back end. Now, I'm not opposed at all to a guy like Aaron Flowers playing as a true freshman, or Cody DeCambra stepping into the lineup next year, or Tyler Turner maybe. I just look at that room and the safety room especially and say, not a lot of experience. And I think you want to have a blend, ideally, of experience and youth who have, a lot of talent. So that's why this is a big weekend for Oregon, because you've got all of those guys coming to campus this weekend. And, Brian Smith has come on here, a recruiting expert here at the Locked On Network, and has said, yeah, there's nothing really like an Oregon visit. Now, obviously, there's no game day environment that you can bring them to, but Oregon knows how to make an impression, and they're going to be making an impression on some pretty important guys as Oregon looks to fill out the roster for next year. So this being a weekend episode, I wanted to make it mailbag heavy because I've been getting a lot of mailbag questions. Keep them coming. We have got an entire offseason. I'll be able to answer every single question you could possibly want answered on a podcast, whether it's related to Oregon or anything else. By all means, ask away. YouTube comments or Twitter at Smalls_55 or at Locked On Ducks. Great ways to get in the mailbag. Best way to get in the mailbag, though, most reliable way, most readily available way, is to become a Locked On Ducks insider over at SUBTEXT. Free 14-day trial. Then it's just $5 a month. You get priority mailbag access. You can talk with me one-on-one. All sorts of other perks as I send out, my reaction to breaking news and whatnot, and keep you up to date with everything as best I can. That's where we go for our first mailbag question, though not the only one, but man of my word, it's priority. Alex says, Mr. McLaughlin, I feel like Dobby in Harry Potter when Luna calls him sir. I like him very much. Okay. I've been listening every day on my long commute to work. Appreciate it. That's the whole point of the network here. Look at that. Oh, that's fantastic. You've made this season and my commute much more enjoyable. You're most welcome. I appreciate you tuning in. As far as postseasons go, conference championships and the CFP are easy to understand. However, bowl games are a bit confusing to me. Can you please explain the hierarchy of bowl games and which ones have more prestige and why? Thanks, Alex. Yes, I absolutely can. So the way that the bowl system is structured, it dates back to the previous century. And as these bowl games have been created, because there are a lot more bowl games today than there were, say, back in 1975, they have worked out contracts with conferences to create cross-conference matchups, because that's, of course, how you're going to generate the most intrigue and gauge where teams, could be going into the next season as well. So that's kind of the foundation of it, is the bowl games. There is an entire committee that that runs the bowl game itself, and they have a contract with various conferences that say, hey, we're going to put our number 3 seed against the number 4 or number 5 or whatever out of a different conference. Because there are so many, there's rarely a direct correlation between like the number 3 out of the Big 12 and the number 3 out of the ACC. It's usually like the number 2. I think the Alamo Bowl is pretty close. I think that one is number 2 out of the Pac-12, number 3 out of the Big 12, something along those lines. That's been, that's had some really good games over the years. One that we don't need to talk about back in 2015 against TCU, of course. But that's the fundamental way that it gets structured, is the conferences who get the money and then distribute it to everyone in their conference, and they get more if their team wins, which is why you should root for Pac-12 teams, generally speaking. Not in all instances necessarily, but generally speaking, you should root for Pac-12 teams to win their bowl games, because it means that more money goes to the conference, which they then distribute to everybody else. So that's kind of the short version of it. But there are a couple more things to know along that front. And there's one thing that you got to know about Prize Picks, and that is that it is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. The easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. That's it. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll in. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's very funny? You can find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy, so your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. That's why you should check them out at prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Use code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Use code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Second segment sips make this show much easier to do. Played basketball again today, by the way. For those of you that care, which is probably about 3 of you of the thousands that listen to or watch this show, you all get to hear about it, though. You'll notice clearly the lungs have improved because I'm not coughing up a lung every 10 seconds as I did yesterday. It's almost like conditioning is a real thing. Crazy how that works. So the bowl games are indeed confusing. And the way that they can get even more confusing is when you have a team go to the college football playoff, or in the past, the BCS national championship game, because that essentially bumps everybody up. So Arizona finished number 3 this year. Normally, Oregon, as the loser of the Pac-12 championship game, would go to the Alamo Bowl. But the Fiesta Bowl, which is a bowl of greater prestige, which I'll get to in just a moment, selected Oregon to play. Oregon accepts the invitation. Thus, Arizona, the next highest seeded Pac-12 team, gets the invite to the Alamo Bowl. They're playing Oklahoma, by the way, who's now is going to have a backup quarterback, as we know. Still, that could be a really, really fun, exciting game. So the reason that some bowls have got more prestige than others is related to the caliber of teams that they attract, whether it's built into the contract that they have of, hey, this bowl is always going to be the number 3 SEC and the number 2 Big Ten, or whatever it may be. That's what kind of determines the prestige or the caliber of a bowl game, and how, this is a world in which bowl games are all now seen, if you're not in the college football playoff, as they stink, they're no good, no one cares who, gives a rip about them and whatnot. But back when people cared about that sort of stuff, it was about the caliber of teams that would play in them. And those matchups are determined by historical ties, influence, tradition, and all that sort of stuff. So hopefully I explained that well. If that was not clear, let me know. But money absolutely plays a factor in all of that. Getting back to the Ducks here for just a moment. This question from Simon, and this is a good one. Spencer, greetings from Portland, Oregon. Greetings, my friend. Love the show. Here's my question for the mailbag. What would you think of Dillon Gabriel and Dante Moore both going to Oregon? Thank you for the daily show. Love it. Go Ducks. Bo Nix for Heisman 23. Yeah, Jaden Daniels is going to win the Heisman. There's a pretty good case that Michael Penix should win it. There's also a pretty good case that Jaden Daniels should win it. If you ever want my thoughts on that, drop a comment or question in the mailbag, and I'll explain. But that's kind of my synopsis of it. Is Jaden Daniels should win, though there is an argument for Michael Penix. But that's a longer explanation here. So the prospect of adding both Dillon Gabriel and Dante Moore, if Ty Thompson transfers out after Dillon Gabriel decides potentially to transfer to Oregon, adding Dante Moore could very well be a move that makes sense. If you're looking at Dante Moore or Austin Novosad, I think Novosad has got plenty of potential. I think Dante Moore has got more. Didn't want to use his last name there. I think Dante Moore has got greater potential and more arm talent. However, I am not someone who is completely punting on Austin Novosad. But if you had your choice, once upon a time, as a Duck fan, it was Dante Moore. He flips to UCLA. Oregon flips Austin Novosad from Baylor. I like Novosad, but were we as Oregon fans looking at that as an upgrade in any way? No. Dante Moore was the higher rated recruit for a reason. So that could mean that Novosad one day decides to transfer. If you're able to have Dante Moore and he's serious about the developmental thing that which I'll touch on in just a moment, then yeah, it could, in theory, work out. Here's my honest take, which is what I always give you here on the show, whether I think you'll like that opinion or not. I think that Dante Moore, having put out statements in the last few weeks about a willingness to sit on the bench or wanting to focus on his development and whatnot, I think there is at least an element of that is posturing for any team that wants to add him. I don't think he actually wants to go somewhere where he's not a starting quarterback in 2024. I could be wrong on this. It's just a theory. But when you're someone who was just benched because you couldn't stop, you had what I call JWS, Jameis Winston syndrome. You kept throwing the ball to the wrong team. When that is the case, I don't think that there are coaches out there who want to see a quarterback making any sort of statement with regards to, well, I'm going to dunk on Chip Kelly and say he was no good and I just need a better situation or anything like that. The humble approach, and he is a humble kid. I've interviewed him before. He seems like a really good dude with a good head on his shoulders. I think there is an element of kind of playing the field, playing the game, or at least covering his bases to be able to go somewhere and say, hey, this is my mentality. This is what I'm coming in with to try to gain favor with a particular coach. That is my read on the situation. I think the most likely outcome, and what would frankly be a good one for him, is if he went to Michigan. It's where he's from. He's a Detroit kid. And Jim Harbaugh's system does not require the utmost from your quarterback. And I don't think Chip Kelly's system does either, but they run the ball even more at Michigan than they do at UCLA. It's an even greater run-centric offense. I mean, there was an entire half of football in which J.J. McCarthy didn't throw the football. He didn't throw it. They said, no, we're just going to keep running against Penn State over and over and over and over again. I think that's the best fit for him. If he is serious about sitting for a year as a backup and developing, which is something he could have done if he'd stayed committed to Oregon. I totally understand why he left. His primary recruiter, Kenny Dillingham, and future quarterbacks coach decided to go elsewhere. He could have sat behind Bo Nix. He could have learned from Will Stein. And I think that would have been really beneficial for him, especially with the backdrop of how this season played out for him, trying to be the starting quarterback at UCLA. He has got immense potential, but a good coach and a good offensive coordinator is going to have to unlock that. Will Stein runs a very quarterback-friendly offense, as we know. I think Dante Moore, in retrospect, should have stayed committed to Oregon. It would have been in his best interests. And if he is serious about wanting to sit for a year and develop, yeah, Oregon could be a spot for him. There is absolutely a path there. I think he'd be able to beat out Austin Novosad on the depth chart and could line himself up to be starting in a very quarterback-friendly offense coordinated by Will Stein in 2025. When you look at the last 2 years of Will Stein as an offensive coordinator, Frank Harris at UTSA was one of the leading passers in the country, and Bo Nix is in New York City, where later tonight, if you're listening to or watching this on Saturday, he has the chance, however remote, of being selected as the Heisman Trophy winner in 2023. It'll be Jaden Daniels, but he is a finalist there. He was not a finalist a year ago. Oregon didn't make the playoff last year either, but his numbers were so darn good that he is in New York City right now. And that's a testament to what Will Stein did as the offense coordinator. He's a Broyles Award finalist. He didn't win it, but he was the Broyles Award finalist for a reason, for the top coordinator in the country. So I'm not someone who's in the camp of, yeah, let's get both Gabriel and Dante Moore, as in like it's the top option for the Ducks. Is it a feasible one? Yeah, in theory. Ty Thompson would probably transfer out. Would, maybe Austin Novosad would. Maybe Novosad would stick around, try and compete with Dante Moore in 2025. I don't know. I haven't talked to the kid. I don't know what he thinks his timeline is as it pertains to becoming a starting quarterback at Oregon. We've seen, 4-star quarterbacks ride the bench for a couple of years, not get a chance, and then transfer out. I mean, Jay Butterfield, for instance. He was behind a couple of guys for 2 seasons, and then when he didn't get the chance, he said, you know what? I'm going to go elsewhere. Maybe that's what ends up happening with Novosad. Maybe it doesn't. So I think there's still a lot of time to let that stuff play out. But I mean, in theory, if Dante Moore is serious about, I want to sit, I want to be developed, who better to develop you than Will Stein, who has clearly had an impact on Ty Thompson. That much is undisputable. And Dillon Gabriel, who next year barring an injury, is going to break Bo Nix's record for the most starts in the history of college football as a quarterback. That'd be a really good situation for him. Retroactively, the best situation would have been for Dante Moore to stay committed to Oregon in the first place, but I get why he made that particular choice. Still more to get to on today's show, including we got to give some love to some individual Ducks that have just had fantastic seasons. Your car will have fantastic seasons if you go check out eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, mine's the Red Rocket. It sits out in the garage. I never want to let it go. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Alrighty, let's finish today's show, shall we? Been a good one. I'm glad I decided to do this. Not gonna lie. I got ready for the Southern Utah game, which is Saturday night, 6:30 Mountain Time on ESPN Plus. If you want to hear me do broadcasting in a different capacity, that being play-by-play, I got ready for the game, and then I was just kind of sitting around today. I went and played a little pickup basketball. I was in better shape than I was the day before, but there's still work to be done in that particular regard, getting Spencer into better shape. It's a tall order. I like food, okay? I'm like Remy in Ratatouille. I like food, okay? There's a GIF about that, and that is how it's pronounced, GIF. Okay, let's stop my rambling here. Thank you, Spencer, for stopping yourself. You're welcome, Spencer. All-Americans. All-Americans for the Ducks. This is a really tough list to crack. It is not easy to become a first or second team All-American. Oregon's got 1 on the first team, 2 on the second team. Bo Nix, second team All-American. Well-deserved. Heisman finalist. Troy Franklin, second team All-American. An argument could have been made for first. I understand why he was second. Do not fully agree with it, given that he had more receptions, yards, and touchdowns than Marvin Harrison Jr. this year. But you know what? That's the way the game is played. Marvin Harrison Jr. winning the Biletnikoff was decided before the season started. And that much is just blatantly obvious. He's not even top 5 in receiving yards this season. Like Malik Neighbors, Roma Dunze, Troy Franklin all had more yards than him. Other guys did as well. But those 3 in particular had a pretty good case. That's the way college football often goes, though. So those 2 guys on the second team, Jackson Powers Johnson. Gosh, I hope he comes back next year. I don't know if he will. I don't know how much higher your stock can get when you're a first-team All-American. And he is the first ever Oregon recipient of the Remington Trophy, given to the best center in college football. I mean, this guy, by the way, before the season started, I didn't have doubts about the offensive line. I had questions. Questions like, what's it going to be like with a different left tackle and center? Those are the 2 most important offensive line positions. You could argue center is number 1. You could argue left tackle is number 1. I think you can reasonably make that debate go either direction. All good and fine. Jackson Powers Johnson had played a handful of snaps at center. Slides over after playing guard the last 2 years and is a first-team All-American and the first Remington winner in the history of Oregon football. This has been quietly one of the best consistent positions for Oregon over the last 15 to 20 years. Max Unger, Hronis Grasu, Jake Hansen. These guys have been big-time centers and stalwarts along the offensive line. I will not hold it against Jackson Powers Johnson if he goes to the NFL drafts. I don't think anybody would. I mean, this guy has been a Duck through and through. By the way, you talk about a Duck that is a true Duck. How about him being one of the many 2021 recruits, not many, but one of the handful of 2021 recruits brought to Oregon by the Mario Cristobal staff, stuck it out. I mean, if you're talking, if I'd been hosting the show, like right around that time, which is kind of when I started, when Oregon was looking for Dan Lanning, so I was focused more on that. But you talk about players that would have been a prime candidate to follow Mario down to Miami, any offensive lineman would have been. And JPJ stuck it out, said, no, I want to be here. And he became the alpha, the leader among that group this season. Has played since he was a true freshman. Once upon a time was playing both sides of the ball in that Alamo Bowl against Oklahoma, shifted to the offensive line. His technique is as good as anybody we've seen. He pancakes dudes. He's a great athlete, gets down the field. He's just a stud. Honestly, I would love for my Seahawks to draft him because the Seahawks desperately need a good center. And JPJ is as good as it gets. A well-deserved award for an awesome, awesome Oregon Duck, whose golf swing I saw, by the way, in a match with Casey Rogers. And by the way, a couple thoughts there. First of all, JPJ stepping up to the first tee and being a lefty completely threw me off. I didn't see that one coming. Secondly, both guys can swing the golf club a little bit. Thirdly, I'm just saying, JPJ, if you were Casey Rogers listening to or watching the show, if we ever get the chance, let's play some golf. Jackson Powers Johnson, by the way, is a Utah native. I reside in the state of Utah. If you ever want to play some golf, come on down. Let's meet up in St. George. Or heck, I'll go up to wherever you're from and we'll make it happen. We'll make it happen. And oh, by the way, I'd smoke either one of you. Just saying. But we'd have a great time. But I'd smoke either one of you. Okay. Let's end with this question from Mike. Hey, Spencer, been watching all season. Love what you do. Appreciate it. Been a Ducks fan for about 15 years, but as early as I can remember, my family has been watching Longhorn football. Somehow I found Oregon and it stuck. Brandon, baby. Branding 101. Every week we watch both games together. My question for you is, do you think the Longhorns can beat Washington? Of course they can. They're favored for a reason. Oregon was also favored by much more against Washington, and at one point in time trailed the game by 17. Came back, took the lead. We know how that went. Washington wins by 3 again. Texas can absolutely beat Washington. I don't think they're going to, but I think they can. In the same way that Oregon can beat Washington. I have never once watched, including the Pac-12 championship game, by the way, I have never once watched the Ducks play Washington in this string of 3 straight losses and thought, oh, Oregon just can't beat them. They're just not good enough. They're just not capable. They're not losing the game by 10 to 20 points, but that's how I feel about Texas. So Texas is secondary, suspect. The strength of that defense is their defensive line. Guess what? Oregon's defensive line is really good. And Washington's offensive line neutralized them in both meetings. So I feel really good about Washington's offensive line. Their tackles are studs, just big time. Rosengarten and Troy Fautanu, like those are big time dudes, NFL dudes. And I think that is a bad matchup for Texas. And I think it's going to be a close game. And what do we know about Washington? They've played a lot of close games and they just keep winning them. Kalen DeBoer won Coach of the Year because he just knows how to win situationally. And his teams are always ready for those moments. I think it's going to be an awesome game. I think Washington wins. I won't be shocked if Texas wins. Yeah, of course, they can beat them, but they've got to beat Washington situationally, and that's a tough thing to do. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.